Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? It's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday. That's a good thing. And there's no snow on the ground. That's an even better thing. So thank you, everyone. Today, we're going to have an awesome day. Yes, this is our Thursday Live. It's our 19th edition. I'm not sure if we can get this count going to 100, but maybe that'll be a milestone that we have. So thank you again for joining in. It's going to be a very, very interesting, perhaps maybe a bit sensitive conversation today as we get into some legal conversation around the whole pandemic. The reason why I wanted to do this today is that because we have had a lot of questions that have come back to us in the space that we're in on the benefits. So again, my name is Deb Wiegers, and I'm the managing principal of Wiegers Financial and Benefits as it relates to the benefits division. And we are very, very glad to bring these Thursday Live sessions because this is our way to better inform the business community and our clients with respect to different types of subjects, direct and indirect, that do have an impact in your business on a day-to-day basis. So the theme of our month is I want to thank you. And I thought that was actually quite appropriate because there's a lot of things I want to be thankful for today. One thing I want to say thank you to the Greater Saskatoon Chambers because of the Nsba Awards that are going to happen later today, and we're very grateful to be nominated in a few categories. So that's going to be quite fun to attend and see people celebrate some successes because we all are looking for some positive feedback in today's space. Number two, Sarita, a few days back, they had a Go Money pitch where they were giving young entrepreneurs a chance to pitch their business. And if they were nominated as one of the finalists, they were able to receive a chunk of change. So anywhere from, I think, $10,000 to $2,500. So I think that was quite exciting to give our young entrepreneurs an opportunity to flourish and share their story. The next one is the Nsba Awards, and it's November 4th. And again, it's business builders. It's going to be celebrating successful businesses in the city in various categories, such as community and growth and expansion and things like that. So thank you to these associations for always keeping our business community in the forefront and really, tipping their hat to the successes that they have. The Canadian Pension and Benefits Institute, the CPBI, I'm very grateful because I've got the opportunity to be able to share our story as it relates to the benefit space. And as we well know, and we'll share a bit of this with Adam, our guest that will introduce formally, there's lots of changes happening in the space today. And benefits is amongst all that with labor shortage, war on talent, and that's right, pandemic. So I will be doing a presentation to them, and we will share that to our clients and to the audience when we've had a chance to do that on November 4th. If you'd like to attend, I'm sure that they would love to have you in attendance, and you can search that out on the website or just call us or email. My email address is deb.wiegers@wiegers.ca, and certainly let us know if you have any interest in joining, and we can get you the information on that. So lots to be grateful for, and I'm grateful for having Adam here today, and the W Law Group in general. So thank you, Adam, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure. And I want to tell you that we had some interesting discussion about, it was April. So 6 months ago, we had Adam. So for those who are joining in today, you maybe perhaps had a chance to listen to his last session. And we talked a little bit about employment law and wrongful dismissal and all those sorts of fun things in the space of law. But of course, there was always a little bit of a lean towards the pandemic and how that was impacting it. So let's just say the story goes on, maybe in a much broader, a little bit more interesting stage. So we're going to do a little Q&A and share with us. I will welcome the audience to share your questions with us. We do have a few that we want to get through. So if you do get them to us, we will be sure to address them at the end, just in case with the conversation we're going to have throughout, we've already answered your question, just to keep the flow there and keep us on time. So be definitely giving us your questions. If we can't get to them today, or maybe we stump Adam, we can't answer, we will definitely get back to you with an answer very, very shortly after this session. So again, thank you to Adam. The W Law Group, I want to say, is our preferred partner, one of our preferred partners. And we've been able to really share his expertise and the team's expertise with our clients by virtue of the fact that they are a preferred partner. So in the space of our clients, when they have a question, they're very open to have that call, and a 5-10 minute conversation, as Adam and I shared, is really a good start to saying, this is something we can solve very quickly, or this is something that we maybe need to spend a bit more time on. And in today's tumultuous times, we do want to get serious about those questions. If they need to be dealt with, you need to deal with them, because if you don't, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult to tend to these things if they get too far ahead. So thank you to the W Group for offering to be that. And today, Adam is offering, for those who join in, that if you do have a question for him, because you've taken the time to sit with us today, he will certainly be more than happy to take your call if you do want to call him and ask him a question as well. So I want to do a shout out to Phil, our tech, I call him friend and colleague. He's been awesome in helping us get all this stuff sorted out, because we all have expertise and technology is not one of mine. So thanks again to Phil. Before we start, just a big mention that our webinar and our will be taped, and it'll be on our LinkedIn and our Facebook and our website. So there's going to be lots of spaces in which you can go grab this. Please do share it with others that you know that you feel will value from the insight that we'll have to offer today as well. So I think that's it on the housekeeping items. So let's just roll right into it, Adam. So Adam, I know you've got a very extensive and impressive bio. I do want to just make forefront is his expertise is in the space of employment law and a wide range of topics that he's, as we talked, he said, more than busy. Very busy, Adam? Very busy at your end?
It's been really busy. It's like I mentioned before when we were talking before this started. I think prior to the pandemic, I think I was probably doing about, give or take, 30% employment law. And since the pandemic started, the employment law has just taken off. It probably makes up 60 to 70% of my practice now. It is as busy as it has ever been. And I think if you look across the legal community, it seems to be the same way for most firms. It's a really busy time.
Yeah. And it's great news. That's actually fabulous news in light of the fact that we know that some businesses are struggling a bit. But I know from my space, we're definitely see a really very interesting shift. We talked about predictions. We talked about things that we thought would be happening in April. And, some of them are still happening, but some of them definitely have escalated to a whole different level that we probably never would have anticipated. And I know in our space, Adam, definitely pandemic is playing into a lot of conversations and a shift in mindset with our clients, and certainly the labor shortage that's out there, this war on talent. Hanif, another great preferred partner from Express Employment, he did a presentation for the chambers, and we share a lot because it's in our space. And we talk about, this is actually very real, and we have to take this very serious. So what does this mean to us as a business, and how do we shift? And, what does compensation, what does rewards look like? And we all need to tighten up a little bit in that space, because we're on a journey and it's not going to end anytime soon. So, but definitely your expertise in the law, I think, will be there for a few years to come. And I hope that, people are really going to get real about trying to do business the right way. So to protect themselves, right? So that they can continue to grow and flourish in their businesses. You do spend a lot of time, Adam does spend a lot of time giving his expertise to various boards, with the Highway Traffic Board and the Labor Relations Board, the Human Rights Tribunal. So again, thank you, Adam, for all the time that you give to the community to help us in those spaces as well.
Yeah, those are all boards I've appeared in front of. So
yeah, I don't know where you find the time. But we all do. I was saying to my group, and then we'll carry on. I was saying to my group, I said I was away for a meeting because business is important. And we had an internal session, and that's important too. I scared them. I said, I said I was out. I was trying to figure out a way that I could clone me. And then there was this pause. Okay, thank God, you guys, I couldn't do it. Because I don't think they want many more of one of me. So, so some days anyway. But all right, I think we're going to roll right into the questions. So what we did is we kind of broke it down into 3 sections. So we're going to kind of go into general topic number 1, mandating vaccinations in the workplace. Now, some of these questions are going to be pretty straightforward. The answers are going to be pretty straightforward. And I won't apologize for that, because there is many viewers today, and thank you for that. And some are very, very educated in this space. They just need a little bit extra knowledge on the other level. But some are really still trying to figure out from the ground level where to go. And many of our businesses, and the hundreds of clients that we deal with, we need to appreciate that a lot of our businesses are small businesses, and they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have HR. They don't have legal resources. So they really are scrambling to get this advice and to be able to do it right and right from the get-go. So when we go through those, certainly bear with us, but there will be, I'm sure, areas that we will probably challenge you in what you do know and don't know. So the general topic, mandating vaccinations in the workplace. The first question, of course, we'll have is, can employers mandate vaccinations?
Yeah. So when we talked back in April, that was a big question mark. And one of the things we talked about was the possibility in the future of receiving some direction from the government as to whether or not employers can do that. And fortunately, that direction has come. So effective October 1st, for government employees, proof of vaccination or a negative test was implemented for all government of Saskatchewan employees, ministry, crown, and agency employees. There was also regulations put in place as of October 1st for all non-public employees, so all private employers. And essentially what it says is that all non-public employers may require all of their workers to be fully vaccinated and provide evidence of being fully vaccinated, or to provide a negative COVID-19 test result at least every 7 days. So with respect to government employees, it's been mandated. With respect to private employers, effective October 1st, they now have the discretion to implement a vaccination policy, which would be either requiring employees to be fully vaccinated and provide evidence, or provide negative COVID-19 tests. Now, the regulations provide some guidelines on how that needs to be implemented, but the direction at least provides employers with a clear indication of their authority to actually implement that, and it's up to the discretion of each employer. So on that, with respect to the negative test, the regulations set out what type of test that has to be. There's notice requirements of how to notify employees that you're implementing the policy if you choose to do so. There's exceptions for the policy. So for example, a worker is not required, if they're not going to be vaccinated and then going the route of providing a negative test, they do not need to provide negative tests if they're on vacation or on employment leave or other leave granted by the employer. Those tests are to be done during non-work hours and at the cost paid by the worker. Employers are required to set up a verification process for collecting and reviewing the evidence. So for example, if employers are fully vaccinated, employers have to figure out and set up a process for obtaining that information from employees. Same thing with the negative tests. If they're being done on a weekly basis, the employers have to establish some sort of verification process for obtaining that information and to keep it confidential. But what we now know is that in the non-public employers have the discretion to require employees to either be vaccinated or provide negative test.
And I think, it's I know that the government and the business associations have been very, very exceptional in sharing a lot of that information, but do understand some people aren't reading it, right? They're busy in the field trying to finish off their job before the year end. So you're right, there's a lot of confusion around that. Yeah. And I think, one thing that, what I hear coming back from our clients is, what are my rights, and then there's that privacy issue in terms of just like, I don't have to give that information, and employees are asking us, do they? Right? They do. And I know, just from us as a business trying to, move through all these hurdles, Pat Kyle, our office manager, has been exceptional. And I know that she's had, bounced ideas off you, Adam, as well, in terms of just the things that we need to do to ensure that we're making sure all those steps are there, and who bears the cost and where the privacy issues are. Now, do employers, or should they, I guess, because again, this comes up, should employers have a vaccination policy in place?
Yeah, so that I think is kind of the big question that a lot of employers are facing. Now, they have a right to do it, or they have the ability to do it, but should they? And that's really up to the employer. Employers know their own workplace, and the regulations provide them with that discretion. Some things they need to consider is, first and foremost, they have a general duty to ensure the safety of the workforce, and that's regardless of whether they choose to implement a vaccination policy. Employers have a general duty to protect the safety of its workforce under occupational health and safety legislation. So with each individual industry and each individual workplace, they need to decide, well, what measures are necessary to ensure a safe work environment? Are employees interacting with vulnerable populations? What's the likelihood of exposure in that workplace? Because a lot of those questions will assist employers in determining whether or not they should be implementing a policy. And I can tell you that we're slowly starting to see decisions and case law from the pandemic. And there are now situations where failure to take reasonable precautions have led to litigation, resulting in orders requiring employers to take specified steps to protect employees from COVID-19. We've seen in long-term care homes, we've seen orders that nurses be provided with appropriate PPE. We've seen in retirement homes that there be an order that plexiglass barrier be installed in a nursing station. We've seen in food production line workers order that they wear medical or non-medical face masks. So you're starting to see results of litigation that has flown out, or that has resulted from the pandemic. And I think over the next 6 months to a year, you're going to see more of that. So it's simply a situation is what steps are necessary in an individual workplace to ensure the health and safety of employees. And one of the big things that employers need to consider when they're implementing a vaccine policy is, are they willing to enforce that policy, and are they willing to enforce it consistently? Because that's going to be, if they don't enforce the policy consistently, that's going to create risk and potential liability. And what I mean by that is, if you're deciding to implement the policy and require either vaccinations or proof of a negative test, well, how receptive are your employees going to be? Are you going to have a manager who says, no, I'm not doing that, I'll quit, or you can fire me? Are you willing to run the risk that you lose that employee? And keep in mind that if you're going to implement the policy, you got to do it consistently across the board. And if you got a junior employee who you're willing to terminate if they don't follow the policy, if you have a senior employee who you're not willing to discipline if they don't follow the policy, that can lead to some issues for you. So it's those types of things employers should be considering in advance of implementing that policy, so that if they're going down that road and deciding to implement a policy, that they know how they're going to deal with the policy, how they're going to enforce it, how they're going to deal with employees who are not receptive to it. And there's the flip side. There's certainly work environments where employees are definitely receptive to vaccination policies and are pushing for it. So you see it on both sides, but I think it's important for employers to consider that in advance and be methodical in how they implement it. And part of that's going to be making sure it's a properly drafted policy In that regard, it likely makes sense to get some legal advice on it.
Yeah. And two things come to mind, like anti-selection. I mean, we talk about it a lot in our space, anti-selection. So you cannot make rules for one person and not apply them to the other person. It needs to be consistent, because it's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
It's not if that comes up as a conversation, it's just when it's going to come up as a conversation. And what's the magnitude of the repercussions of that? And I know that, we see, like, I mean, we've got clients in every level space, right? And and a couple of examples of just, like the challenges they have on the hospitality side. Well, if they're mandating their customer to have a proof of vaccination, it's really difficult to not have your own employees not vaccinated. I mean, that's the respect that we'd want to have. I mean, in our world today, I mean, we want kindness and we want respect. And the respect is, if I'm asking, I want you to know that I'm going to be safe, and I want to know that I'm going to be safe. And it's an exchange of that kindness and respect that we want in today's space. Sometimes maybe a little bit more difficult to get, but that's what we would strive for. So, and I do agree, like there is risks with not having it. And I think the repercussions of that are much larger. I think of conversations that come to my mind, Adam, if there's a key employee and they're coming to work and their choice is, to vaccinate, but they're within an environment where there's not vaxxers, her stress is her mother who is just reliving through cancer treatments. And the stress levels and mental well-being space that, it's compromising our mental well-being health just by having to deal with it just in itself.
Yeah. Oh no, it's an issue that is occurring not only in the workplace, but outside the workplace. There's those debates, and there's certainly people who are their employees who are concerned that when they're in a work environment where there's no vaccine mandate, that they're potentially exposing themselves. And from an employment standpoint, or from an employer standpoint, are you at risk of losing employees because you're not implementing such a mandate? It's not an easy discussion to have, and I'm not saying there's any easy answers to a lot of this stuff, but it's important to consider these things. So, and with any of these things, one of the if an employer is deciding to implement a vaccine mandate, one of the biggest things or best practices is to just ensure those open lines of communication. And part of it is educating employees on the purpose, the effectiveness, and the risks of vaccines, and explain to employees that you're going to provide them time off to get access to vaccinations. The occupational health and safety regulations require or allow workers paid time off in order to receive their vaccination. So it's some of that may just be having those discussions. Like I do litigation, and a lot of the issues that come to me are after the lines of communication have broke down. And it's one of those things, if you can be upfront with employees and ensure that everybody's on the same page, often those types of disputes can be avoided. So it's even with the providing the notice, like the regulations require notice to implement the vaccine mandate. They don't specify the required notice period. But if you have employees in the workplace who are not vaccinated, well, if you talk to them and can provide a notice period when you're going to be implementing it to allow them an opportunity to go get vaccinated. And the regulations provide a vaccinated person is someone who's had both vaccines and for at least a period of 14 days. So it may be something that you're giving everybody a lengthy heads up that this is coming. So you're not surprising any employees and going to put any employee offside right from the get-go. It's those open lines of communication with employees can often avoid some of the disputes that flow out of these.
And not to make it like a matter of fact business communication. I think we still have to remember it's a human to human conversation. And I think keep the human in it. So
Yeah.
I agree, communication, giving them lots of time to absorb that information, ask questions if they need to, but keep it human, not matter of fact, this is the policy, because I think that's what puts people on defense. So what happens if someone doesn't want to get vaccinated?
So if an employer makes the decision to implement a vaccination policy in accordance with regulations, and there's an employee that says, I'm not doing it, I'm not getting vaccinated. Well, again, they have the alternative to provide negative tests. If you're enacting a policy in accordance with the regulations, it's kind of that two-part: either get vaccinated or provide a test every 7 days. Now, if there's an employee who says, I'm not doing either, failure to follow that vaccination policy, if it's enacted properly in accordance with the regulation, can lead to discipline. If an employer's encountering such a situation, I think it certainly recommend they get legal advice because each situation is different, and you may need to look at the employee's employment contract or the other circumstances surrounding the potential discipline. But it's a situation. It constitutes a failure to follow a policy of the employer, and if it's properly enacted policy in accordance with the regulations, it can lead to discipline. And that's one of those. It kind of goes back to that open lines of communication. The more you can properly communicate in advance with the employees, hopefully you can avoid those types of situations. And you won't always. In certain work environments, there are going to be employees who refuse to follow vaccine mandates, and there will undoubtedly, and you've seen it in the news, there's lots of instances where employees are leaving certain workforces because of vaccine mandates. So I'm not saying you can avoid that type of situation entirely, but those open lines of communication can certainly help.
The best we can do is mitigate it, because at the end of the day, everybody has a right to what they want to do, and we have to understand that, right? To agree or disagree, we just need to understand it, but to mitigate it. When we talk about the workplace, and I think this is where it gets interesting, because I was thinking about our last conversation, and we really spent a lot of time on employment contracts and how COVID really swung us into this new, position of what I had now is definitely not going to work going forward, right? And I think the workplace, along with the ability to do their job, if they aren't vaccinated, if they maybe aren't able to get vaccinated, and how does that impact their job, and how does that impact the employment contract? So let's talk about COVID in the workplace. If we talk about the workplace, can an employer send an employee home if they show symptoms of COVID?
So the short answer, yes. First and foremost, employers have an obligation to ensure the safety of their workplace. And if there's a risk of COVID transmission in the workplace, then the employer has a right and obligation under health and safety legislation to protect its workforce. And a reasonable precaution to take in those situations to protect the workforce from infection is to send that employee home and prevent them from coming back until confirmation that the employee is fit for return. And generally, it's reasonable to restrict that employee from coming in if they've contracted COVID or if they have symptoms of COVID. So yeah, it is a situation where if an employer encounters someone who has symptoms of COVID, or certainly if they've tested positive, they have the ability to send them home. And in those situations, again, it often comes back to that line of communication. It may be something where, depending on the work environment, that employer decides to offer that employee the opportunity to work from home in order to avoid loss of income. If they're able to do that in that particular workplace, they may provide them with the opportunity to take a leave of absence. It's something that discussion is valuable, but the overarching concern is that the health and safety of the employees in the workplace So can an employer send an employee home if they show symptoms? Yeah, they can.
So what about, because I'm thinking there is ways in which if someone had to go home, they could work from home. That'd be great. Then you can go from home and nothing has been lost. But compensation wise, if you're on the front line and you have to go home, I mean, I can understand why some employees are really worried to even share anything, because I'm not sure what the stance is on the general business community, but what happens if I sense that someone has a cough and I'm worried as an employer, I send them home. Where's the compensation piece comes in? Who pays?
Yeah, and that's something you kind of look at on an individual basis. I'm not going to provide any kind of overarching rule on that, because each situation may be different. Depends on the circumstance, depends on the employee contract. But as an employer, it's one of those things. As much as an employee may not desire to go home, that can't be the employer's concern. You know, the employer's concern has to be the safety of the entire workforce. And if you have someone who's showing symptoms that creates a risk of transmission within the workforce, that has to be the primary consideration.
Yeah, true. So could an employer be liable if an employee catches COVID at the workplace?
So generally, no. Where an employee falls ill at work with COVID, in most cases, an employee will not be able to sue their employer. And that's because workers' compensation legislation provides essentially a no-fault compensation plan for workers who are injured or contracted illness at work. The legislation essentially acts as a bar to employees who wish to bring legal action against their employer. I'm not going to say there could never be a situation where an employee can bring a claim against their employer if their employer is acting negligent or not enforcing proper COVID protocols, but generally no. But that employee may be eligible for workers' compensation. A worker, based on WCB's policy, a worker may be entitled to compensation if there's a confirmed link between the worker's exposure and their employment, and if and they contract COVID-19. And in order to fall within that, certain conditions have to be met. There has to be confirmed exposure in the workplace. The time period that the illness is contracted in is in close proximity to the confirmed workplace exposure, and the nature of the employment creates a greater risk for exposure than the general population. But it is a situation where there's the possibility that the worker would be entitled to compensation through WCB, but generally they would not be entitled or be able to sue their employer.
Unless, to your point, they haven't put the right protocol and followed the protocol. And
yeah,
that's
well,
the importance of making sure those pieces are in place.
Yeah, I think there is risk to any employer who's not following proper protocols and who doesn't put in proper measures to prevent COVID-19 transmission in the workplace and to ensure a safe and healthy work environment. So yeah. It's I know I keep coming back to that because it's kind of one of the overarching themes that's what the employer's responsibility is. And if they don't properly comply with their obligations, and there's certainly potential risk to the employer.
Yeah, because here's what we have to be thinking about. What happens if this happens in the workplace? And even if all the protocols followed, now you've got employees that are fearful. Other employees are fearful and they don't want to come back to work. What happens with that?
Yeah, well, so if an employee doesn't want to come back to work, one of the biggest things is trying to figure out, well, why is that employee not wanting to come back? And it's a situation where, again, open lines of communication. If they're fearful of coming back because of COVID-19 in the workplace, then it's essentially a situation where they're refusing what they consider to be dangerous work. And the Saskatchewan Employment Act gives the workers the right to refuse dangerous work. So if they or an employee refuses to come to work due to fear of contracting COVID-19, there's a number of things that need to be need to be considered. One, it becomes a bit of a morale issue. Is forcing this employee back to work in the best interest of the company? Or if you force them back to work, how does that impact the employment relationship? How badly do you need them to return? Is it okay if they stay off for a little while? If it is, so be it. One option that an employer does have is they can carry out an investigation to determine whether any steps can be taken to satisfy the employee that the workplace is safe. And if the employee is not satisfied that the workplace is safe, the employee or the employer may request an occupational health and safety officer to investigate the matter. And if that investigation determines that the workplace is safe, the employee can no longer refuse to come back. So, but that in most situations, it should kind of be a last resort. Forcing an employee back to work through a OH&S investigation can have impacts on employee morale. It can have impact on the entire work environment. So it is one of those things. It's really important for employers to ensure the safety of employees, and if there are employees who are fearful of coming into the workplace, have that discussion. Figure out what that fear is, whether it's a valid fear, whether it's something that can be addressed. Because certainly, as you mentioned, having a bunch of employees who are afraid to come into work is not going to be good for business.
No. And maybe part to what we discussed on communications, maybe this is the piece that has to happen before it happens. So that if this was to happen, here's what our promise to you is, Mr. Employee, Mrs. Employee. And if that's laid out properly at the onset, then it doesn't look like a knee jerk. It doesn't look like it's just, because I'm doing it because of you. And yeah. I think that would maybe make the relationship maybe not as marred versus reacting to it, right? So,
absolutely.
So we talked about, allergic reactions, and we want to move on to working from home because I'm mindful of the time. But I do have to say, because I do hear that a little bit, and I'll be the first to tell you that my experience with getting the vaccination didn't go over really well. So, but I did still go for it and get the second one. But I did have a really bad reaction to it. And I can see how people might have reservations, and so if they are feeling like I'm being pressured, I got to get the vaccination, all of a sudden I have this bad reaction or allergic reaction. Is there any liability that moves back to the employer on that basis?
Yeah, again, likely not. If a vaccination was a condition of their employment, so if the vaccination mandate's in place, an allergic reaction may be considered work-related injury, and the employee may be able to submit a claim to WCB. But similar to contracting COVID in the workplace, it's unlikely, and generally they would not be able to come back against the employer.
Okay, good to know. All right, so let's talk about working from home.
Sure.
Because that's where there's a lot of gray, and I think that really is starting to play into even the conversations, maybe more as we talk about the shortage of labor and the war on talent, what you can do and can't do, should do, shouldn't do. And now we've got the pandemic in there. So can an employer require an employee to work from home?
Yeah, and that's something, obviously, if like looking back to last March or a year and a half ago, that was one of the things that lots of employers required of employees is to work from home. And one of the big things was that it was a reasonable safety measure to take as opposed to coming to the office, because certainly at that time, it was unclear the extent of potential transmission within the office. When considering whether it's reasonable to require employees to work from home depends on a bunch of circumstances. Are the employees' duties compatible with working from home? Do they have the capabilities to work from home? And do they have the proper equipment? And it must be safe for that employee to work from home. Is there a requirement that they interact with customers or clients? And it's I think you've seen huge advancements in video conferencing over the last kind of year and a half. So I think a lot of those types of things are being addressed. But it becomes an issue of, does it make sense? The counter to that is then can employees be required to return to the office? which I think is one of the things you're seeing more now.
Yes.
Is there have been employees who've been working from home for a year and a half, and employers are saying, well, I want you to return to the office. And is it something, well, can you do that? And in general, employers have the right to manage their workplace, and that's including requiring an employee to perform work and attend at the workplace. But with anything, it's one of those making sure there's those lines of communication, because, and part of it is figuring out, well, if you're requesting employees to return to the office and they're hesitant, well, why is that employee hesitant to return to the office? Is it that there's not proper safety measures in place and they're concerned? If that's the reason, then it's something that, as an employer, that should be addressed. If it's a safe work environment and that it's simply a personal preference of the individual employee that say, well, no, I want to work from home on a going forward basis, I don't want to be in the office. Well, that then becomes a situation that the employer has to decide, well, are they going to require that employee to return or not? Generally, the employer has the ability to require employees to attend work. Are they able to make exceptions? Sure. Is it something that they should discuss with the employees? Absolutely. And again, it's that those lines of communication that can avoid a lot of the disputes between the parties. If you try and sit down and figure out, well, if I'm asking this employee to come in and they're not, well, why aren't they? What's the reason they're not?
Yeah. And I think, again, I think COVID taught us something last year when we all take a step back, and because right away everybody was at home. And then it was like, holy crap, how do we manage all this? So, it really came along the importance of, drilling down and getting measurements and metrics and expectations and building the model and monitoring it and then identifying. So if it became a case where someone wanted to work hybrid, then it's, yes, you can do it because you can be effectively at home and at work. But what happens if they can't? And to your point, they're choosing not to want to come back just for other reasons, and then they can't. So I think that opens up a whole other Pandora's box. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to roll a question in because there was a couple of, thank you everyone for the questions. So Neve had a great question. Let's go back to the question he talked about when you're interviewing people, because now what we're hearing again on this, kind of war on talent, we're kind of overusing this term, but it's real. Is that if people are looking for, opportunities and they've made a preference that they want to, work at home or work in the workplace, but when the interview is happening, do we have a right to ask about vaccination status?
Yeah. So one thing, because the regulations came into place and you have the ability to implement a vaccine mandate. If an employer is choosing to implement a vaccine mandate, that should be expressly made clear to any new employees. So if you're going out and hiring and you decide, you know what, we're going to implement a vaccination mandate, it's something that kind of goes back to what we talked about back in April, is the importance of a proper employment contract. But you're going to make the employment conditional upon them complying with your employee or your workplace policies, which will include a vaccination mandate. And if they can't comply with that, then you won't be hiring. So it's something that from the very outset, that needs to be made clear to employees, and the vaccine policy or the mandate under the regulations requires employees to provide proof or verification of the vaccination. So it's something that you certainly require from new employees entering the workplace. But it's important to make that clear at the outset, and having a properly drafted employment contract can really assist with that.
Yeah, goes back to get it in writing.
Yeah.
Policies, right? So
Yeah.
I've got a lot of great questions. I'm just going to review working from home. If you think of something, Adam, that you want to, I think we've covered off most of it.
Yeah. I think the only other thing I was going to say on kind of working from home, and it kind of goes to absences, because I've certainly had situations where employers have come to me and said, you know what, this employee, they've been off either because they had contracted COVID and just haven't come back, or they chose to take a leave for whatever reason. It's just goes back to that proper communication, because there's been case law that's come out talking about the requirement of employees or employers to ensure that employees who are off are actually intending to resign or abandon their position before filling that other position, before filling their position. So if someone's off on leave because of COVID or whatever else, it's not something where an employer can assume that they don't want to come back and just outrightly terminate them. There has to be those open lines of communication, just to ensure, and if that employee does intend to return, it needs to be made clear, because there's been case law recently in situations where employers have not taken those extra steps. They've assumed with COVID or whatever other reasons they're not coming back, and they've been found liable. So yeah, I just want to toss that in, but it's something, again, goes back to the open lines of communication.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So one of the questions I'm seeing, Michael Cars, hello, Mike. He asked, is there a duty to accommodate an employee who is elected not to get vaccinated?
So
remote or otherwise?
So here's what I have to say. Like, yeah, there's duty to accommodate, and it's based on prohibited grounds under the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. Now, in the regulations that came out that allow employers the ability to mandate vaccinations, remember, it's kind of two-pronged. It's that they have the ability to provide proof of vaccination or provide negative test. If it had just been the proof of vaccination and there was someone was refusing to get vaccination on religious grounds or whatever else, then that would obviously need to be explored. I can't really think of a scenario where there would be accommodation because an employee is refusing to provide a test. Because it's not just the vaccine. If there are valid human rights reasons why an employee would not want to get vaccine, then yeah, accommodation certainly needs to be considered. If someone raises the fact that for human rights reasons they are both unwilling to get vaccine or provide a negative test, it's something that you should take a look at and likely obtain legal advice in relation to. I can't think of a scenario where there be a human rights issue with providing a negative test. So I think it's that second component that is going to be. I think I don't think duty to accommodate is going to arise. Or certainly is not as frequently as it would if it was just the vaccination by itself.
Well, and I think to your point, there's two reasons where perhaps vaccination won't be applicable, and that would be health reasons and religious reasons, and those have to be laid out and very clear. It's not just a statement that says I can't because. So I think the good news is we've given options, and that's what I think had to happen. The option is there. It's A or it's B. And unless you can show us on this third level, the religious and the health reasons, why really you can't get A or B. And what you're saying is you can get a test. It's you have to challenge that part. Yeah,
like the personal preference by it. So the personal preference is not a ground for accommodation. It's just not. It's if there's some prohibited ground that someone's claiming for not getting the vaccine, so be it. But it's that second prong of the test, or the other option of showing proof of a negative test. I think that's where I think it's going to be. I can't think of a scenario where someone would have a valid ground for requiring accommodation to not get a negative test.
Yeah. So when we talk about privacy, because when we talk about, certain things are, are to the right to the employee to be private, religion be one of them. So a question came, and again, thanks, Hanif Hamani. If I claim for religious reasons, I can't get vaccinated. But do they have to disclose their religious beliefs? Like, I mean, is there a point where how far can you go to pursue this conversation?
So if they're seeking accommodation, they have to disclose the reason that they're seeking that accommodation. So you can't just, it would not be sufficient for an individual to say, I require accommodation, but I'm not willing to tell you why. Because from an employer standpoint, in order to provide that accommodation, you need to figure out the reasons that the accommodation is being sought. But again, if you're implementing a vaccine mandate in accordance with the regulations, you're not requiring anybody to get a vaccine, because there's those two options. If they don't want to get the vaccine, that's their choice. But it's the negative test which they'd have to comply with.
Perfect. Question: in the case of businesses that are required to ask customers and clients for proof of vaccination status, what are the employer's responsibilities to keep their employees safe?
Okay, so I'm not positive I understand the question. So whether or not the business is required to test employees or test customers, and there's the recent guidelines from the public health order, which indicates which businesses that they're required to do that. The overarching obligation of that employer is to ensure the health and safety of that workplace. And I'm not going to provide any overarching policy or any overarching measures which would apply to each scenario or each workplace, but it is a situation where their obligation to ensure the health and safety of their workforce is no different than any other workplace that has that same obligations. What is required in that particular workplace may be different, though. It may be that if you're interacting with the general public more, or if there's vulnerable populations, it may be a situation where there is a greater obligation to take additional measures to ensure that the health and safety of the workplace. But it's really one of those things you have to assess on a case-by-case basis.
See, I know for us as a business, when we're going out to see our clients, it's kind of who has the conversation first. But we do have many clients that are just asking us, or not even asking, they're just saying, this is our policy. We require double vaccination in order to come into our workplace. Yeah. So I think, rather than getting into that sensitive, obviously from there you have to deal with it. But I think as most businesses want to keep their employees safe, that perhaps has to be that question it's kind of like the elephant in the room. Someone has to bring it out. And so if you're saying, is there a trust level that someone's saying I'm double vaccinated, or are you actually going to require it? Like, it's mandated with restaurants and bars and things like that. I guess that's the part that's still kind of like vague, right? So, but Dustin has a question. What if an employee or a group of employees do not want to wear masks? What is a risk in this situation to an employer?
So if it's a workplace that is required by the public health order to have masks within the workplace, if I understand that to be the question, if employees are not abiding by that, off the top of my head, I'd have to look at what the consequences are set out in the provincial order. It's something where the employer has the obligation to ensure that the employees follow the mandate. And off the top of my head, I can't tell you exactly.
Would that not, Adam, go back to the policy set in place? I mean, I'm kind of just thinking, again, Pat's been exceptional in making sure that we've, done corrective steps, and it is just what it is. I mean, our policy says you need to wear a mask in all public spaces. It's a requirement.
Yeah, so it's something where there's kind of two components to that, because the employer, if employees are not following the policy, that may lead to discipline for the employee. If employees are not following the policy and it's not properly enforced by the employer, that may result in liability for the employer. But I have to look at the public health order to see what exactly the consequences are for failing to follow them. It's not something.
Maybe that's something you can get back to us on, and then I can get that off to you. There was one question on the privacy, was right at the onset, and this is the last question. Then we have to wrap up, folks. Privacy versus safety. Do vaccinated employees have the right to ask who is not vaccinated and who is working and is working in the office while providing negative tests?
If an employer is mandating a vaccination policy in the workplace, and there are certain employees who are not vaccinated but are providing the tests, do the other employees have the right to know which ones are not vaccinated? Is that the question?
Yep.
Okay. That's a good question. The last one, Deb.
I know.
So
you're on a run, man.
the employer has an obligation to keep when they're collecting the information from employees, they have an obligation to keep that information confidential. I'd like to have to take a bit more. It's not something I've actually turned my mind to, whether or not they would be able to disclose it. I would anticipate that they would not be able to, because the collecting of that information from the employees, if there is an obligation to keep it confidential. But I'm going to be careful, because like I said, it's not something I turn my mind to. And again, the last question of the day, you stumped me. So,
but this is good. This is good. You know what this tells us? That there's many questions and many answers we have, and there's never going to be a perfect answer, because as we well know, this is a work in progress thing. It's never going to go away, and it's going to move and shake as we go through this process, because we're learning every day what's going on. So the good news is we're working together, and I can continue to inform my clients and the audience in terms of what some of those things might, because we get those questions every day. So I do, you know, and it is the toughest thing about this whole subject is that it really does create, you know, some relationship barriers and challenges. And that's what makes us really, really sad. It doesn't matter what side we're on. It's just, you know, we always forget, you know, this be kind, be respectful. It's no different. I guess what I would think is religion and politics is that, you know, you have a right to have and believe in what you believe, but just you need to be kind and respectful about how that plays out. And within the workplace, within the families, I think that's where we're going to see some of these challenges. But at the end of the day, it goes down to these things are happening for the very specific reason is that we want to keep our community safe. We want to keep our kids healthy. We want to be healthy, and we want our economy to be healthy. So this isn't about being, you know, difficult. This is about doing the right thing so we can all work together to make sure that we're going to survive and thrive through this, what we hope to never see in our lifetimes again is a pandemic. So we're all working with this, and it's new. And I think we've all done a tremendous job. Adam, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with this. I know that, again, with the audience, if there's questions that still continue to come, we can share information back. Adam is very open to taking your calls. And I'm going to say this is a wrap with Adam. I do want to say one last thank you to coming and joining us today. And I also want to say thanks to our next month's speaker. So we have on November 18th, so mark your calendar, November 18th. It's a Thursday because it's Thursday Live. We have Chris Decker, President and CEO of Saskatchewan Trade and Expert Partnership. So people are going to go, well, why is he being one of our interviewers or interviewees? There's a lot of connection between what their space does and what we do and how it impacts our clients and our businesses and the community in general. So really excited to have Chris on board next month. So again, thank you everyone for joining in. Do share the video that will be posted. Share your questions with us. Thank you, Adam, and have a wonderful rest of day and weekend. Take care.